Pat Pattinson is a professional turnaround practitioner specializing in the rehabilitation of distressed businesses with a success rate of more than 95% for all business rescue plans published to date. Pat's commitment to the practice of compliant and ethical turnaround practices is rooted in his passion for saving businesses, saving jobs, and providing the best possible outcome to all affected persons. The restructuring or rehabilitation of a distressed business is one of the toughest things someone can go through, and is often a process filled with more confusion and frustration than is truly necessary. And that's why Pat created this series of turnaround boot camps. The more people know about at least the basics of restructuring or rehabilitating businesses in distress, the more clarity they can bring to the process. This is only one episode in the series of boot camps. Be sure to follow Pat on LinkedIn so you can receive notifications of when registrations open for the next one.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to, I believe it's our fourth one in the series of boot camps. This morning it is Directors' Resistance. It's an attempt to understand that why, although some directors willingly enter into a turnaround process or business rescue, throughout the process or very early on, they become very resistant to the actions of the practitioner. They actually work against exactly what they asked for the practitioner to do. Practitioners, of course, appointed to save their business. The benefit to him is minuscule in comparison to what the benefit would be to the business to save for the staff and everybody else. So keeping that in mind, we need to look at the director's duties during formal business rescue. And of course, boot camps are for business rescue. And although we're going to be talking about the formal process of business rescue, it does apply to any efforts of a turnaround practitioner. So when it comes to business rescue, Section 137 contains the duties of a board of directors. Those duties include that the director must continue to exercise their functions as they would have in the ordinary course of business. Yes, they have to do the subject to the authority of the practitioner. It is because should that ordinary course of business not have been correct, the directors must follow whatever the practitioner then implements. It does not, however, divorce or safeguard them from their responsibilities and their fiduciary duties as a director. By way of example, should a business rescue practitioner or a turnaround practitioner do something that goes against what the directors believe to be the ethical and legal thing to do, they still have a duty to act as directors would. They cannot overwrite what the practitioner has done, but certain recourses still remain available to them. 137.3, the request of the practitioners must always be adhered to. And if the practitioners request certain information, documentation, asset registers, bank statements, any of their like, the directors have an obligation to supply that information to the practitioner in a reasonable time frame. Depending on the nature of the information, if it is something that should have been available, similar to if SARS does an audit and they want source documents, it should regularly be available, and it shouldn't take weeks and months to get that very basic information to the turnaround practitioners. 137.4, should the directors of a company take any steps or make any decisions that requires the authority of the practitioner, or that would have in normal instances required the authorization of the CEO or the managing director, if they take those steps without the consent of the practitioner, those steps are void. And there's a very small difference between a transaction or a step or an action that's void and voidable. Voidable leaves it open to be corrected, to be formalized after the fact. But the term is void. It's an end. It's a full stop. The action is void, and that process would then have to be started from scratch. On that point, just another reminder of Section 2182. Section 137 of the Companies Act is part of the Act. It's conditioned. Not doing that is, of course, a contravention. And a reminder of 2182 is that any person who contravenes any provision of the Act, such as Section 137, is liable to any other person who had suffered a loss or damage because of that contravention. In simple terms, if the director refuses to provide the business rescue practitioner with information that he needs to place into a business rescue plan, and that plan is then delayed, and additional costs are incurred, additional losses are placed, that could come back to those directors who did not comply to Section 137. Now, before we go too far, one of my favorite quotes when it comes to this topic is from a gentleman called Heraclitus, not Hercules or Hercules. And it simply states, no man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and he is not the same man. In the context of business rescue, corporate turnarounds, one of the biggest inhibitors and one of the biggest reasons why conflict arises between directors and business rescue practitioners and shareholders, and to some extent even creditors, is because the commitments that was made at the onset of the process, where the practitioner might have said, this process will take 3 months, we will pay the creditors 100 cents in the rand, and we will not have to retrench their staff. Those are commitments that the practitioner made when he stepped into that river for the first time. In other words, he made those decisions based on the information that he was provided at that point in time. Should that information change, whatever the directors and shareholders shared with the practitioner, it would be illogical to expect the practitioner to keep to what he committed to when he stepped into the river for the first time. As the information changes, so will the concept changes, so might the outcome changes. A rescue that should have been simple at the onset because the practitioners were told we simply need a little bit of time to collect money. That changes into a scenario where the company runs out of money completely, and the practitioner is now not tasked with a business rescue plan, but with securing post-commencement finance. Obviously, the scenario has changed, and it is illogical for the directors, the shareholders, the creditors, and the staff to hold the practitioner to what he initially committed to. He can only commit to those things as long as the information he used it for remains the same. When we look at directors, and what I'm going to ask for you guys to do today throughout the process, if you have come across something like this, please put it in the comments and we'll have a look at it and discuss it at a later stage, or I'll reply to it, or maybe even bring it up during the session. Now, the theory of willful blindness is a very simple one, and it is probably the one that I have experienced most. On the topic of directors' duties, a simple thing, and we've discussed it in previous sessions, is Section 45 of the Companies Act. Those govern loans extended to connected entities. We're going to keep it very simple. A director is aware of loans that he is extending. He is aware that he might be receiving loans because the company is financial distress and he's trying to save a little bit of money by not having to pay the pay-as-you-earn. Now, receiving those loans, he knows he can't pay it back. But instead of communicating that, instead of making it part of it, he doesn't read into Section 45. He doesn't attend the meetings. He willfully prevents himself from becoming aware of certain instances. You might have a scenario where a particular staff member, for some or other reason, is running a sideline business within the company, using business resources and using staff. The company is aware of it. The directors are aware of this. Yet, they decide to pay a blind eye to that, pretend they don't know about it, because as long as they don't know about it, they can't be held liable, they can't be expected to act, and they do not have to share that information with the practitioner. So willful blindness is a very tricky one. As much as the term may say willful blindness, it is basically the directors of the company sticking their head in the sand and forcing themselves not to be aware of something that they in theory should be aware. And you must take cognizance of the fiduciary duties of a director that are supposed to be aware of everything that happens in the business. But it is a serious problem stepping into a company, asking for information, then at a later stage, you realize, but this information is not correct. And when you then go to the directors and ask, but you've provided me with this information, it's not correct, or you haven't provided me with XYZ information. The simple answer or the simple response is, we did not know. But it becomes very difficult to believe the director of a company in the position he holds were honestly not aware of all of these things. And that is willful blindness. Another very, very common and popular scenario is pareidolia. Now, in the simplest term, pareidolia refers to the recognition of patterns and symbols that's not really there. A simple example is that of, I think we all know Elvis in the toast, where you recognize a picture of someone. Or if you go back to our childhood days, you look into the clouds and you see a bunny or something hopping around. It's not really a bunny, but the pattern is there, the symbol is there. Pareidolia then goes further into habit forming. You've got a certain way you travel to work each day because that is the pattern that you recognize. You've got a certain way of performing certain tasks within your company purely because of the pareidolian habit. You recognize that pattern, and once you've recognized it, once you have seen that bunny in the cloud, it's very difficult to see it as something else. We've seen the horse and the duck picture, where once you've seen the horse, it becomes very difficult to see the duck. And that becomes a problem in business rescue, because that pattern, that pareidolian that is there, is not conducive to the business. At some stage, it might have been, but as technology changed, as habits changed, as our clients have changed, so must the way we do business. That is where pareidolia becomes a problem. It cannot be that we are doing something simple because it's the way it's been done for years. The old idiom that says, if it's broken, don't fix it. It might not be broken, but it is also no longer contributing, and it is stagnating, and the business is suffering because of this pareidolia, this habit, this recognition of patterns that might no longer be contributing to your business. Dialectics is a very interesting one. Again, very common, and it's very, very difficult to overcome. Dialectics is when you go into a business and you, as a business rescue practitioner, have certain experiences, have certain knowledges, have certain ways of doing things. The director of that company has been there for years. He's got certain knowledge, he's got certain experiences, and a certain way of doing things. His way has worked for him. Your way will also work. There is no real wrong part in this debate. But as the business rescue practitioner, the responsibility of changing the business lies with you. And you now have to go to a director and say, yes, your argument is right. Your logic is sound. There's nothing wrong with it. However, this is how I now want to do it. This means that the director is not wrong. You as a practitioner are not wrong, but you feel that you need to change it. And here is where communication becomes key. And because there's no right or wrong answer, you would need to determine which is going to be the best, which is the one that needs to be implemented. And again, to break away from pareidolia, sometimes a change is what the business needs. I'm not exactly sure who got the quote, but I think it was Einstein that said, you can seldom solve a problem at the same level and by the same people that created it. And that change might simply be required, and the dialectics becomes very, very difficult. Risk aversion dynamics. This is one of the most difficult concepts, one of the most difficult inhibitors when it comes to the communication of a director during a business rescue process. Risk aversion dynamics simply refers to the decisions made by a director in the past, which at the time might have been correct, which at the time might have been the best for the business, but it's no longer correct. And the director is so concerned about being blamed for the stance that the company is in, is so concerned about personal liabilities, financial risk, risks into his future, that he is reluctant to accept the mistakes that was made in the past. The mistakes are obvious. They are there, but he will motivate, he will justify, he will go out of his way to make sure or to try and make sure that the decisions he made at that time was the right and the sound decisions. And in business rescue, it's forward looking. It's not about what was wrong. It's not about the mistakes that was made. It's not about the risks. It's about looking forward. Unfortunately, some directors in some instances have made serious mistakes and will have repercussions to resolve those mistakes, because practitioners do have responsibilities. They do have risk. If they become aware of something that was wrong, they have to report it. But this risk aversion can never be an inhibitor to save the rest of the business, because ultimately the director is one person. The board of directors is maybe 4, 5, 6 people, where there could be 200, 300 people whose jobs are at risk. And here is where you need to find a way to address these problems without jeopardizing the relationship, risk losing the knowledge and experience that that particular have. And again, it could be possible at the time that the decision was that decision have changed for a long time ago. Retroactive with the risk aversion dynamics. It is again where the director looks at past mistakes, and instead of looking forward as to how we will correct those mistakes, he will justify why he made those decisions he did. He will look at who else could be blamed. That at the time I had to make the decision, because otherwise I would have had to close my doors. I would have had to retrench certain people. I would not have had a business. So that decision was made out of desperation. The justification for that decision is not logic. It's not business. It's not a question of fixing that historic mistake. But the director refuses to let go. He refuses to acknowledge that it was a mistake then. And because he doesn't want to accept the mistake was made then, he is resistant to fixing that mistake now, or simply to change course. It could not have even been something substantial, but he is preventing the process, he's preventing the rehabilitation purely because of the risk and the justification of the decisions that he's made so long ago. Ego defense mechanism. This is unfortunately not as common as the rest, but common enough that it needs to be mentioned. And it is probably one of the most dangerous inhibitors in business rescue. In this particular topic, if we had more time, we could have gone and looked at solipsistic views. We could have looked at the Dunning-Kruger effect. There's a lot of motivations as to why directors take such a Machiavellian approach to the business rescue process. It's not about who was right, who was wrong. It is simply that I am in charge. I'm the director of this business. I am the shareholder. I have kept the doors open. I have brought the business to where it is today. I am the best person to do this. And yes, I might have asked you to come and help me, but you will help me as far as I tell you to. Ego defense mechanism is very, very dangerous. And it is the most difficult directors to work with. All they have is their little ludus, their little domain that they control. And losing control of that to them is such a large risk that they will go out of their way. They will bait the practitioners into making mistakes. They will rather risk their entire business failure to protect their own egos. And ladies and gentlemen, this is not an exaggeration. I have had it before, and to a certain extent currently, where the directors of the business is so resistant because of how they believe they are the best people for the job, that they are risking hundreds of jobs by not disclosing information, deliberately working against the practitioners. It becomes very, very dangerous and very difficult. And in all honesty, the only answer and the best response, the best solution to this is to remove that director from the equation at all costs. And that is to help them, to spite of themselves, not because of themselves. You have to remove them from their business to save their future. Many, many years ago, one of the very first books I bought on the topic of turnarounds. The introduction page, the very first sentence in the book, and it's a book by Gary Sutton, The 6-Month Fix. He actually states that I don't remember it verbatim, but basically when I come in, you leave and profits return. And that is a note to the CEOs of the businesses that he worked with. Initially, when I read the book, I was working in smaller businesses where the director was the owner, the wife was the accountant, and maybe had 2 or 3 staff. So it was very difficult to comprehend. How can you remove a CEO from this business? It's his business. But as I've grown and as I've become involved with bigger and bigger businesses, where there's a board of directors, there's hundreds of staff, there are several separate shareholders who might not even be on the board, it often becomes necessary as a result of this eco defense mechanism to have those CEOs or those directors removed from the equation in order to save their business. Very difficult topic, and I can actually speak on that. But we also have unconscious sabotage, where the directors are so adverse to their circumstances being challenged, their decisions being challenged. So ego defense mechanisms rather see the business go down than having to admit mistakes. And this is normally, believe it or not, your more junior directors. It's not the CEO. It's sometimes even your senior management or just management, because to them, it's not their business. It's not their future. They're young enough in their careers that admitting to that mistake now could jeopardize their lives going forward. Similar instances where it's not even the directors, where you're working with external auditors, external accountants, and you ask them certain questions, but why did you allow this to happen? How could you have signed off the financials here? Why were these decisions made? And those decisions have got serious repercussions. And rather than correcting those mistakes, they will continue to fight against a practitioner. They will continue to make statements that's unjustifiable, purely to protect what they believe their best interest is. But in the long run, it is simply self-sabotaging, because, believe it or not, as business directors have been in their seats for a long time, so do turnaround practitioners. We've done the job, we've seen the movie, we've read the book, we know where to look. And to try and hide things from a practitioner because you're concerned about your self-sabotaging is a very tricky thing to do, because the practitioners will find out more often than not. Sunken cost theory, again, one that holds no real logic. You would enter into a business, let's say hypothetically someone that still make tapes, the old tape that goes into the tape deck into your car. There's no longer a market for it. There's no longer demand for it. There's no way that this business can continue trading. But the directors will explain to you about how much money they've put into this, how much time they've put into this. Blood, sweat, and tears have gone into this business, this department, that they are not prepared to let it go. But sometimes it's necessary to do away with the old to make room for the new. Sometimes it's necessary to change direction for the business. Sometimes you need to move away completely from what you have done into the future, doing something different. By way of example, we all know Nokia as one of the world's leading cell phone manufacturers at its heyday. It's one of the leaders when it came to cell phones. But very few people actually know that originally Nokia was a timber factory. And they chopped down trees. But when that got into trouble, they've changed direction. And over the years, they've changed direction several times, because it's important to save the business. And what the business has done, if that becomes a problem, you need to change that as well and go into a different direction. The sunken cost, quite simply, holds directors back from accepting that what they have done needs to change. There might have been nothing wrong with it, but the world has changed, and so must the direction their business needs to go, irrespective of the blood, sweat, tears, money, and times that have gone into that particular department or business venture. So once we come across any one of these resistant factors, any one of these theories within a company, there's no point in becoming combative. Yes, sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes you need to remove a director, but that should never be your first point in call. And other than the book that I've quoted early on where the CEO leaves, it's not always the verbatim answer that needs to be applied. One of the first things you need to consider is As a business rescue practitioner, as a turnaround practitioner, as a chief restructuring officer, you have been in different businesses. You have seen the way different directors work, different entities work, and the knowledge that you have got may not be applicable to what that particular company is doing. You might not know how to make purple ice lollies, but when you worked in the bakery down the street, there are certain experiences that you bring along with you, and you can never expect a director of a company to know what you know. Share information with them, share knowledge with them, tell them stories, explain to them how it works, make them understand that there are different ways, especially when we talk about Parodeilia. They are so set in that particular pattern. But once you have shared a story, a process with them, they might be more willing to accept it rather than just informing them, this is what we're going to do, or this is my suggestion. Take the time to go into detail. Communicate in writing. It's on there twice, but that's probably one of the most important things. Once you've explained something, put it in writing. And that's for two reasons. And that's why it's on there twice. Number one is to make the communication clear, understanding, and not allowing for the arguments and the debates, but let the director read it at his own time, let him ask the questions and let him understand. But equally important is to have a record of the discussions, have a record of the requests that you've made, have a record, because at the end of the day, when you work with resistant directors, you might need proof of certain actions, certain suggestions, certain communication. So always communicate in writing, even if it's after a phone call, just confirming my phone call, we have discussed this. But at the same time, when you receive an email like that, read it carefully and make sure that the statement contained in that email is accurate. Otherwise, reply and state that this was not accurate, because tacit acceptance can be just as dangerous as no communication at all. At the same time, remain amicable. You need to communicate with them. You need to be calm. You need to consider their point of view. You need to consider their experience. You need to consider their knowledge. But do not become submissive. Do not answer to the directors and the shareholders. As a business rescue practitioner, a turnaround practitioner, or chief restructuring officer, you have a duty to be in charge, and you cannot fall victim to a stronger personality. You need to keep your calm, and you need to keep control of the situation. Also, do not communicate in a vacuum. Do not pick one or two directors and communicate only with them. I always say the turnarounds is not something where you are part of the secret society of secret secrets. Keeping things confidential is very different than running a secret turnaround and communicating certain facts with certain people. That kind of confidentiality, that secrecy, can do more damage to a company than the efforts of a turnaround. And remember, business rescue must always be a collaboration, and it cannot be a condemnation. You are not there to assign blame. It's not your duty. Your duty is to rescue the business, to turn the company around and make it a success. It's not there to assign blame. Similar to that of HR. HR is supposed to be a corrective, not a punitive process. Similar to business rescue. It's corrective, not punitive. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of today's bootcamp. Please remember, as I always say, that the comments that I provide and the information that I share are my own. It is not necessarily the same views of any of the associations that I belong to. It's not necessarily the same opinions of the companies and the other people that I work with. These are my views based on the experience that I have had in my turnaround and business rescue cases. So on that note, thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to sharing the next bootcamp with you next week. Thank you very much.